Janet Stewart is one of Canada's most respected learning design professionals. She got into e-learning about 10 years ago before it was mainstream because of her vision of the future of learning. With more than 30 years of experience in the training industry, she and her We Love Learning team offer high standards of training innovation and interactivity. They work with clients who want to take their internal education programs and move them into the future. Please welcome Janet Stewart.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad you're able to join me and my colleague Carrie, who is here as well. I'm excited to be able to share some information with you this morning about virtual instructor-led training. So just so that we have a chance to see each other, if you can, I'd ask you to flip your video cam on so that we can say good morning and have a little bit of a get to know who's here, who's who in the Zoom. I see that Samantha, Rob, Kelly, Philip, and Carrie Ann and more people are continuing to join us in the next few minutes. So it's good to see you. A few things I want to let you know. I'd like you to try and figure out, now everybody's tool is a little bit different. I realize everybody's on a different device. So see if you can find your chat window. Sometimes it'll be across the bottom of your screen. And if you click on that little chat icon, it should open up on the right-hand side of your screen so that you can see, because you're going to need to access the chat as we go through this session. Also, if you can find the participant panel, again, usually in that bar that is across the bottom of your screen. Sometimes, depending on your device, you might have to kind of hover at the bottom or hover at the top even to get it to appear. But see if you can open up the participant panel so that you can see your name and the names of others. And you'll see what, if you hover over your name, that you have an opportunity to raise your hand. So you're going to need that a little bit later as well. At any time during this session, if you have questions, please go ahead. You can ask them in two ways. I'm not a big fan of waiting till the very end to ask those questions because like the moment passed, right? So better to ask it when it makes sense. So feel free to raise your hand. Carrie, my colleague, Carrie Walker-Boyd, is going to be watching for people to raise their hand, and then she'll elegantly butt into the conversation to ask, to make a space for you to ask your question. If for whatever reason, maybe you have some audio issues or the like, and it's hard for you to ask the question that way, go ahead and put it into the chat, and Carrie will be watching that as well. And then she'll elegantly butt into the conversation to ask me the question. And we'll also save some time for Q&A at the end. So most of you know me in one way or another. Some of us were even together in Jamaica. I say together with air quotes. We were together in Jamaica last week at the LearnFest Caribbean Conference. So that was a ton of fun. That was an awesome example of a live online conference that worked. It had so many great elements of interactivity there. So I'm a learning experience designer, and that means that, and Carrie is as well, you'll meet Carrie a little bit later, but we typically work with companies that need to create training for their employees or their customers, training that they can't just go and easily buy off the shelf or in the marketplace, because the training deals with proprietary information. It might be about their policies or their practices and procedures internally, or even their products and services. And they can't just go out and buy that training. It just doesn't exist. And so they have to work with someone like me and my team to build that training for them. So we take other people's content, if you will. We take their information about their internal, whatever it is, and then we bring that to life. Our specialty tends to be in creating training for that self-directed space, meaning the learner and the instructor are not there at the same time. The kind of training that a person can access anytime, anywhere, and everywhere, from in the middle of the night, if that's what suits them. Or if you have a very global workforce and you have persons who are spread out in different countries across the world and different time zones, then self-directed training is a really good solution for dealing with that. And the same is true if you have to create training for your customers so that they know how to use your products and services. They may very likely be spread out across the world in different time zones. And so it's good to have self-directed training. But as what we've seen during the pandemic is that there's been a huge shift, a scramble, if you will, to take what was scheduled in-person events and move them online. And that's really what we're we have two choices. We have that self-directed space, which is a good choice under certain circumstances, and then we have the live online space like what we're doing today, which also works. But we're going to talk about what works and what doesn't work in that space, because I, likely you as well, have been on lots of terrible virtual instructor led training. It consisted of a death by PowerPoint solution. You know what I mean? The person came on, they shared their PowerPoint slides, and then they were relegated to a little tiny box in the top right hand corner of your screen, and that was it. And they just talk at you for sometimes long periods of time. I've attended lots and lots of sessions that were like that. And I have to admit, and you may admit it as well, that I have been prone to multitasking during such events. You know what I mean? You open up that presentation or that event on this screen over here if you have multiple screens, and over here on your primary screen you're working on your email, or you're checking LinkedIn to see what's happening there, you're reading the news, you're doing any number of things. And it's really easy to get distracted. And what happens is the learner retention rates, they suck. They're terrible in that kind of situation. And that's not what we want. When we bring people together, like today, we hope that they will learn something and that they will go away and change their behavior in some way. In other words, they will apply their learnings. So I'm confident that by the end of this session, you're going to have at least 5 very practical, doable tips that you can implement to kick it up a notch and to make your virtual instructor-led training better, more effective, more engaging. And did I say this is going to be a hands-on event? It is. So not only do you need to find that participant window, like I had mentioned earlier, and the chat window, but you're also going to need your smartphone. So make sure you've got that within reach, because you're going to be using that too. So let's get going. Okay, we're going to start off with a poll. Carrie, can I ask you to launch this poll for me? There are 3 questions, and I want to explore and kind of find out from everyone, what's been your experience with VILT thus far? On your screen now, you should have a series of 3 questions. The first one, how many VILT virtual instructor-led training sessions have you designed or facilitated so far? So you might not have had a chance to do that yet. You might have done a few. You might be doing it regularly, or you might have lost track and you have Zoom brain. That's the way it is for you these days. And then the second question, how many effective VILT sessions have you attended? None? You haven't seen one? You haven't found an effective one yet? Or one and you really loved it? Or maybe you've been really lucky and you've attended a few. So pick your answer there. And then the third question, which of these engagement techniques have you seen used during VILT sessions? And this is a multiple choice question, so you can check off as many as you like. You might have seen breakout rooms, QR codes, word clouds, polling, quizzing competitions with things like Kahoot, use of annotation tools, standing versus sitting. Most people sit when they're giving a presentation, but that's not what we would have done in the in-person world, right? We would normally have stood. So pick those things that you have seen used, and then when you're ready to submit your answer, we'll just give it another moment. And Carrie, you can let us know when you're ready to share the results.
Yep, you bet. We've got 4 out of 7 so far. We'll just wait a couple of minutes for a couple of last responses.
Okay, now in a second, once this poll closes, I'm going to talk about why we use polling, but let's wait and see what our results are first.
Okay, and we've got 1 more to go, and I'm going to give it 10 more seconds.
Okay.
5, 4, 3, 2, last chance. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share results.
Okay, so how many VILT sessions have you designed or facilitated? We've got a real mixed bag, but most people are doing it regularly these days. So that's great news, because you'll be able to take away the tips that you learned today and hopefully apply them right away. I've chosen a set of tips that I think are really doable and really, really easy and reasonable for you to apply. Carrie, I see there's someone in the waiting room. Can you
Yep,
let them in? Thanks.
they're in.
Perfect. Oh, and there's another. They're just coming in like gangbusters now. How many effective Vilt sessions have you attended? One, and I loved it. And we've had a few people who've actually been pretty lucky and attended several effective ones. That's the key word there, effective. And which of these engagement techniques have you seen used? Lots of breakout rooms being used, lots of polling being used. We've seen QR codes, word clouds, quizzing competitions, annotation tools, and standing versus sitting. Now, I know for those of you, thanks, Gary. You can close that poll now. For those of you who were at LearnFest last week, you would have seen in my presentation actually the use of QR codes and word clouds as well. So we want to make sure that we're seeing more, not less, of these types of interaction techniques. They're not particularly complicated, these ones. So there's no reason that you can't all try them out in the coming weeks. So let me ask this question, and if you are ready to share, you can just either butt into the conversation or raise your hand in the participant panel. Why did we use polling, and why did we use it now in this particular presentation? Who is brave enough to give us a thought about that? Just go ahead and raise your hand to let us know, or take yourself off of mute and go ahead and butt in. Any volunteers?
Samantha here. I think polling is done to somewhat gauge participants' level of knowledge on the topic being done.
Yeah, that's a great reason to use it. Sometimes, just like in an in-person world, we see energizers, icebreakers, and the like used ineffectively, and sometimes we see them used effectively. Anytime you use something like polling, in this case as an opening exercise, it's must lead people to content. Think about all the courses you've ever been on, and sometimes they had like an icebreaker, and you think, why did we do that? Well, it probably wasn't relevant to the topic. And so people end up saying, well, that was a waste of time, because it was. Any kind of energizer or icebreaker or opening activity should lead people to content. It could introduce the vocabulary that you're going to be using today, which this polling did. There was lots of Vilt worked into that. But it also, as you suggested, Samantha, allows me to know a little bit about what the experience of the group is. Now, we use polling to gather that information, but why did we do it now? What's another reason that we would have done it now at this particular point?
Hi, this is Arlene from Trinidad. To engage the participants very early in the game.
Right
so
on.
They can have an idea of where we're going.
Right on, because I said at the opening that this is going to be an interactive and engaging session. And then if I proceed to talk for the next 10 minutes, people will be like, oh yeah, right. Okay, what's her idea of engagement? So it gives you a chance right away, and an expectation, if you will, to get involved. And that will carry itself, hopefully, through the next hour. If you think about an in-person classroom, you come into it, everybody sits down, and the instructor proceeds to talk at people right away for, half an hour of introductions. That sends a message. This is going to be a passive day. This is what it's going to be like. As opposed to, you get in, all of a sudden you're in your groups, you're having to talk about something, you're having to share information, come up with information together. Right away, there's an expectation. Oh, this is going to be an interactive day. And it's kind of subliminal, but it really does matter. It really does make a difference. Okay, let's go on to our next activity. In a moment, I'm going to ask Carrie to share the screen and ask you to annotate. So look on your control panel to see if you can find your annotation tool. It's in different places for different people. Carrie, you were playing around with the annotation tools yesterday. What would you say?
Yeah, so where I found it was if I nudged up on the top of my Zoom screen, my annotation pen would drop down.
Okay, it looks like a little pencil. So you want to have that ready to go. but it won't work yet, not until Carrie shares the screen. I was going to say Sherry shares the screen, but that's my backwards.
Okay.
Carrie shares the screen. So what I'd like you to think about now is your personal online facilitation skills. And it's probably a mixed bag. You probably think of some things that you do really well and other things that you think you'd like to improve. But what I'd like you to do is think how your personal online facilitation skills relate to one of these pictures. In other words, you would finish the sentence, my personal online facilitation skills are a lot like a beach because, or they're a lot like a paint splatter because, or they're a lot like a sailboat because. So I'm going to ask you to annotate, and I see that Carrie has shared the screen now. So you should be able to use your annotation tool and circle the picture that is most meaningful to you. And then in a few minutes, I'm going to ask for a few volunteers to be brave and share why you picked that picture. So take your annotation tool. And you just go ahead and circle whichever picture speaks to you. Okay, so we've got a sailboat circled and the stairway. The greenery is circled. Anybody else? If you're having trouble finding your annotation tool, go ahead and put your choice into the chat and then Carrie can circle it for you. Always have a backup plan. That's another tip. Always have another way for people to participate if they run into some tech issues. So Carrie Ann's asking you to circle a sailboat for her, Carrie. If you could do that, that's great. Thank you. Anybody else need us to circle for you on your behalf? Okay, all right, we've got a few. So we got a few people who have circled the sailboat. Let's start with that one. Could one of you share with us why you circled the sailboat or the sailboat? I can't talk today. Okay, somebody who circled the sailboat. You just take yourself off of mute and go for it.
Hi, this is Carrie Ann. I went with a sailboat because it tends to be a journey, and it's sometimes a little unpredictable if you have tech issues, for example, or participants who is either a little lost more than others or a little bit more engaging than others. So you're not quite sure where it might end up. It's a journey, it has a process to it, a beginning and an end. So that's why I went with the sailboat.
Oh, that's great. I love your analogy. And you're so right on. When you are teaching online, it's awful to say, but there's just so much that can go wrong, not just with your own tech, but with other people's tech. And you really, the more you practice and the more experience you get, the easier some of those things become to deal with. But what I just said about having a backup plan is so important. I have a backup device here so that I am seeing what a participant is seeing. I'm logged in as a participant, so I'm seeing that. And then I'm also, when I said, oh, maybe people will have a hard time circling or finding the annotation tool, we need to give another route for a person to be able to participate. And that's why we have Carrie there ready to circle on other people's behalf. Okay, how about we have a couple of people who circled the stairway and the greenery. Would one of you be willing to share why you picked that one? Think about annotation tools as they're anonymous. So anybody who shared that one willing to share? Okay. I would say that a lot of times people will even circle the paint splatter because it's a bit of a dog's breakfast sometimes when you go online and there's just, like I said earlier, there's so many ways for things to go wrong, so many things that can happen. And you need to be as prepared as you possibly can be, but at the same time, you need to be ready for anything to happen. And
Janet, I'm
you are with
gonna butt
that.
in here with a
Oh,
quick
sorry.
question. Yeah, I have a question here from Rob, was asking about are the features that we're using available in the free version of Zoom, or are they just in the paid version?
I believe they're all available in the free version of Zoom, Rob. I haven't used the free version for a long time. I would say that polling, I believe, is not available in the free version, but I do believe annotation tools are. It would definitely be something to check into, because free is great, but at some point you need to have the paid version in order to get some of the bells and whistles.
And I will add on to that I'm logged into a free version right now, and I have the ability to annotate, so I can confirm that that is free one.
Yeah, so there's probably a difference between if you were hosting or you were being a participant, right? So I think the tools that are available to a participant may very likely be linked to the host's account, which in this case is my account and is a paid account. And therefore you have all of those things at your disposal. If you were to be the host, Carrie, and you're on a free account, it's something that you could check into, but I know that polling is not available. I'm not sure about annotation tools and the like. Okay, let's carry on. I can get you to stop sharing that screen, Carrie. Ooh, my words are getting all
I can
mixed
be
up
Sherry.
today. Yeah, right. Okay, so even 10 months ago, but definitely in previous decades, this is what training looked like. You had to gather people when you needed to teach them something, whether it was customers, employees, you needed to gather them physically into a particular space on a particular time, date, and place. And as such, there was a lot of expenses associated with this. There's pros and cons, of course. There's some elements of interaction that are harder to create online, but it could be very, very costly and time consuming, and to actually even just organize it. And also, if a person missed the session, then what? They may have missed critical information, and when is the next event or next session, next training session available? And maybe they just end up going without, either for a while or permanently, if it was a one-of-a-kind training session. So let's go then to the current day. Carrie, we have someone in the waiting room. If you can let them in, please. Nowadays, with online training, we have so many more options, and most people have an idea of what online learning looks like based on your experiences. So you may have done a live session like this, and you think this is what e-learning is, but e-learning is actually a full spectrum of choices, and we'll take a little bit more closer look at that a little bit later. But you can have things like, as shown on the laptop, the self-directed training. You can have the live online, which is sort of, we all know that Zoom screenshot nowadays. Even infographics are a form of digital self-directed training. They can be great for job aids and help to break really complex tasks down into simple steps that a person can easily absorb. And that's what, any e-learning solution, you want it to make it really consumable for the learner. And then we also play sometimes with augmented reality, which has just got so many possibilities. If you rent equipment, or you're in the tourism industry, or you're in the healthcare industry, there's just so many wonderful opportunities around augmented reality. And then virtual reality, we tend to see that used mostly in, aviation and other types of industries where there's a high element of risk or danger associated with the training. And we can replicate the real world inside of virtual reality technologies. And then that way the person can go ahead and learn and practice in a safe and secure environment. But e-learning really levels the playing field. It's so accessible. Really, all you need is a device and access to the internet. And I know that that's not something that exists everywhere in the world, so we need to make sure that we change that game. But it really does make education available to the masses, and it also is a great way to deliver post-training performance support in micro learning chunks. In other words, the person has some training, but then they go ahead afterwards and are delivered little micro pieces, or they can access a resource library of short videos, for example, on processes that maybe they're not as familiar with, or that they don't come across as often. And just like you go to YouTube to look something up, you know, that maybe you've got a squeaky noise in your car, you go to YouTube and you look it up and you go, oh, okay, you know, you look for that shortest video you can find, something that's a couple of minutes as opposed to the 18-minute version. Same thing in the workplace. We can use microlearning as a great post-training performance support program. But there is no one size fits all. There's actually a huge spectrum of choices when it comes to learning. And I don't expect you to be able to read this very busy chart, but this is really representative of the spectrum of choices. And the one thing I want you to take away is that as you go up this chart, the level of complexity increases, the learner retention rates increase, but because complexity increases, so does time and cost to produce. And the same is true as you go across the chart. The learner retention rates increase, but so does time and complexity to produce. So in every learning situation, in every learning project, if you will, we have to look at who's the learner, what's the learning objective, and how are they likely to consume the training in order to figure out where the best fit is on this spectrum. Today, we're focusing on the virtual instructor-led training, which is that live component. The other three levels are actually the self-directed type of training. And I would say whenever you're designing virtual instructor-led training, at least go for the most complex that you can manage to create, because you know, death by PowerPoint, I talked about it earlier, it's over here at the bottom, in the bottom corner. It is simple, which makes it cheap and easy to produce and fast to produce, but the learner retention rates are really, really low, which isn't what you're going for when you're in a training capacity. You want people to remember most of what you taught them or shared with them, not the opposite. So try as best you can to go for a more complex version and use some of the interaction techniques that we're going to use today, or that we are using today. So next thing we're going to do is create a word cloud. Now, some of you, as you mentioned, maybe you were at LearnFest last week as well, and you've already done a word cloud. So you're the subject matter experts. You've got some experience in this already. But in a moment, what I'm going to ask you to do is take your phone, and Carrie has a code that she is going to put in the chat that you will need. We're going to use a tool called Mentimeter, and you can create your own Mentimeter.com account. It's free. There are paid versions as well, but actually you get a lot in the free version of this particular one. So I often will use word clouds, and that's included in the free version. So I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you to think about the words that come to mind when you think of e-learning, whether you call it e-learning, virtual learning, digital learning, online learning, doesn't matter. But what are all the words that come to mind? And I need you to have your smartphone ready. Okay. I want you to take your smartphone and open up the camera and then hold it up to the screen. A little box will appear around this QR code. And then you'll see that there's a little box appears at the top of the screen. You're just going to tap on that box. And that's going to take you to menti.com. If you have any trouble doing this with your phone, and other, most cameras and most smartphones nowadays can do this. Sometimes you need a QR reader, but a QR reader app. If you don't have that, that's fine. You can just simply open up your browser and type in menti.com, and you'll get to the same place. Okay, so just to recap, we've got the QR code. You scan it, you get that little box, you tap it, and it takes you to menti.com. Now at this point, this is where you need the code. And Carrie has put that code into the chat box. It's 7440185. That's 7440185. You put that in at the top, and then it will take you to the third screen where you can enter as many words as you like. You can enter 10 at a time and then hit the submit button, and then you can go back and do it again. There's no limit to how many words you can enter. How's that word cloud shaping up, Carrie?
I'm going to go ahead and share the screen now.
Okay.
And let's take a quick look. I'm just going to give a couple seconds for some words to pop up, and there we go.
Okay. Starting to happen. Okay, keep typing in as many as you like. Whoops, we see Google now. There we go. Starting to form. We see keyboard, challenging. E-learning can be challenging, certainly when it comes to the tech side of it. It needs to be interactive, otherwise I would venture that it is not effective. It is convenient. It can be done anytime, anywhere, and everywhere, particularly the self-directed type, because you can log into that in the middle of the night. With VILT, virtual instructor-led training, we still have a time and date situation. The place, of course, is online, so that's a little bit easier to organize than a meeting room with coffee and cookies and meals and things like that. And it's interesting that we have both cheap and costly. So that is because of that spectrum that I showed you a few minutes ago. The death by PowerPoint version is very cheap, but it's also not very effective. And then, of course, at the other end of the spectrum, we have the VR, the virtual reality type stuff, where we have heavy duty programming that makes up the actual training components, and that is still quite expensive. The equipment is a lot less expensive than it used to be, but the programming associated with it is still quite costly. Perfect. Accessible, self-paced, hands-on, innovative. Hopefully it is. Learning curve, self-control. Stable internet is such a huge important piece of this. If we don't have stable internet, it can be very, very, very difficult. That's another reason that I have a backup device today. When as the leader of the training, if my primary device goes down for whatever reason, I actually am logged into another device on a different network even, so that I can quickly switch over and become Janet B, if you will. Okay, Carrie, thanks so much for sharing that. I'm just going to go back to that spectrum earlier that we talked about. I think that the sweet spot is level 2. So this is kind of off in the weeds, but we have the virtual instructor-led training at the bottom of this food chain, if you will, as being the easiest, fastest, cheapest to create. And then we have level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 tends to be the self-directed version of Death by PowerPoint, although it can be better if it has embedded video and audio and things like that. And then in the self-directed space, level 2 is really where I think you get the best balance between time, cost, and quality. Okay, so that is how you create a word cloud. And as I said earlier, you can create word clouds for your sessions. Just go to mentimeter.com. I have no relation to Mentimeter, no affiliate or anything like that. I just find it a really useful tool. And they do have things other than word clouds as well, which you can use. And you can actually make a multi-slide presentation that you could play, and every screen has something different. You can use polling and all kinds of really interesting things. So I would encourage you to check that out. Now, I have a colleague of mine, Nerdan Tokos, to thank for this graphic. It talks about what are the 5 things you should really take into consideration when you're designing a self-directed session. So the first one, the red box, is that your sessions should be no more than 60 minutes in length. Now, you can cheat this a little bit with question periods and if it's highly interactive, but really after 60 to 90 minutes, people need a break. They at least need a nature break to go and do something else, grab a coffee, visit the washroom, whatever that is. And I would say online, we see a lot of people who should be encouraged to, close their eyes, squeeze their eyes, give their eyes a break for a few minutes. These are the kinds of things that you didn't have to design into the classroom, but you did have to design in physical breaks where people could get up and move around. Because in the in-person classroom, we used to put people in groups, they by nature, they got to move around. We don't have that. When we put people into a breakout room in Zoom, it just happens in a second, right? And then they come back in a second, and there is no physicality to that. So you need to also plan to have some of those physical breaks in there or designed into the actual event itself. No more than 2 learning objectives, because really we're talking about an hour, right? So how many learning objectives can you reasonably shove into an hour? Well, I would say no more than 2. And your interactions, you should be having some sort of element of interaction. Like we've done the word cloud, we've done the polling, we've done different things already. We've stopped to take questions, interactions every 3 to 5 minutes. So that takes some practice and planning and design. And your visuals should be changing every minute and a half to 2 minutes. You don't want to have, I've seen these PowerPoint presentations where the person is just on a visual and they talk for 10 minutes on that visual. Well, break that visual up into many pieces. And of course, all the things that apply in the in-person world, like don't have too many words on the screen and all that sort of stuff, and use lots of pictures and images instead of just text. All of those things apply, and more, I would say, in the online world. And it's so easy to switch your slide and just take one slide and turn it into 5. Like, just go ahead and do that. Your learners will thank you for it. And then the last one is use an engaging platform and all of the tools that it has to offer. I've seen lots of persons who are using Zoom, but they haven't used the polling. They're not using the annotation tools. They're not asking people to raise their hand. They're not asking for a thumbs up here or there. They're not using the breakout rooms. Well, why not? Those things are there. And especially if they are on a paid version, those things are there. Use them. Use them to your advantage to, again, your learners will thank you big time. All right, let's talk about some of the things that you need to keep in mind as the facilitator. I took these 4 pictures at different times of day in my office. Now you can see the one on the top left is pretty dark. That's with no lights on, middle of the day. And then just below that, totally washed out. I have a window in my office and the sun shines in at a certain point of the day, and that's how I end up looking. So I had to install curtains so that wouldn't happen anymore. And then the bottom right picture, bottom left picture, my apologies. I'm looking at it backwards. The bottom left is super, super dark. That is in the evening with just regular room lights on. And then the one in the top left is, I think, the best. That is done with some lights that are kind of carefully fashioned around the front of my computer. And honestly, they are fashioned together with bubble gum and string. If you saw a picture of my office, you would think that is ridiculous looking because they're kind of hanging out from the shelves. But it's what I need to do in order to get some decent lighting. Now, today I'm actually working with a shadow box and in a little bit different setup. And I have a shadow box, which makes it better. It makes the lighting a lot more consistent. But it also, as you'll notice, sometimes it interferes with my glasses. So I have to learn to not lift my head too much and talk like that. Otherwise, you guys get all the glare and you can't see actually me, or I feel like I can't see you. So lighting is important. However, people can forgive poor lighting. And we've seen, oh, here's one more thing. When people go like this, like they go up to their camera, no, they go like this and you can only see the top of their head. You know what I'm saying? You've seen these people in Zoom, right? And you can only see the top of their head because they're looking at they're looking at the wrong screen. Like, learn your tools, learn where your camera is, learn how to adjust your camera, learn how to adjust your lighting as best you can. People can forgive bad lighting, but they can't forgive bad sound, because if they can't hear you, they just end up logging out. They just leave. because it's just too difficult to hear you. And this is a picture I took from a colleague session I was doing a couple of weeks ago, and you can see the variety of headsets and speakers that people have. Find something that works for you, find something that's comfortable. I personally have the Blue Yeti and I love it. I love it. It's got so many settings on it, and I hope you're getting really good sound. But find a speaker that is external, or a microphone that's external to your computer. If you're just using the one that is on your laptop, chances are you're going to have a lot of background noise and a lot of tinny sound. If you're using Zoom and most other platforms, do a practice session by yourself. Just talk at yourself for a bit, record it, and then play it back and see what your audio sounds like. And then you can make a decision of whether or not you need to boost up your audio in some way. At the very least, you could wear the earbuds that come with your smartphone. They, for the most part, they'll plug into your computer nice and easily. I know that's what Carrie's wearing today. She had a different headset on earlier, and I said, Carrie, you sound like you're underwater, like it's all garbly. I don't know what's going on. And we don't know what's going on, but she had a backup plan. She grabbed her earbuds from her phone. It's maybe not as pretty looking as, professional with the big fancy headset and the microphone that comes across your mouth, but it works. It works. So have a backup plan, have some good sound. And then know how to adjust your tools. Like today I happen to be using the green screen feature, or the virtual background feature in Zoom. All right, that's where my slides are. I'm not using the share my PowerPoint version or approach. That's why I sometimes have to move around, because I'm in the way of my slide. I prefer this simply because I have more control over what you see. Everybody has different devices, and I have, depending on the version of Zoom they're running, or if you're using a different program, the same kind of thing applies. But right now, what you can do is next time Carrie shares a screen, you can play with this feature, because you can adjust the size of let's say the PowerPoint slide that's being projected, and the size of the speaker. And most people don't realize that. In the top right-hand corner, you can change your view from speaker to gallery and back again. So right now, you might have had me on gallery view this whole time, in which case I was just a little box, one of many boxes on the screen. Or you might have it set to speaker, in which case I appear bigger and then other people appear smaller, sometimes across the top, sometimes down the side, depending on your device. But when you share your PowerPoint, all that changes. It changes for you as the presenter, which takes some practice, because I know earlier Carrie was sharing the PowerPoint slides, and then she's like, now I've lost the participant panel. Where did it go? And so you got to play around with that and make sure when you do this other thing's going to happen, and then how do I get back to where I need to be? Same thing, when you arrived this morning, there was music playing, again, to create some life and excitement. You so often arrive at an event, and an online event, and it's just deadly quiet. Nobody's talking, nothing going on. Maybe there's a screen being shared, maybe not. So in this case, you arrived and there was music playing. You're like, oh, somebody's here. Good. Okay, I've arrived in the right spot. And there was something visual, and there was a task for you to do, and it told you when we were going to start and that sort of stuff. There was some chatter going on in the chat feature. So all of these things help to make it more interactive right off the hop. But this is something you need to know how to do on your own screen, and you need to know how to explain it to other people how to do it. So take some time to practice with that. The key to adjusting the size of your PowerPoint and speaker screens at the same time is that those two little bars that show up in between. And as I said, next time Carrie shares a screen, you can practice this. You can see if you can adjust the size of the speaker and the screen itself. Okay, let's do a case study. I'm going to show you an example from some virtual instructor-led training that I designed recently for one of our clients. Now, in this case, these are human rights reps, and they have this very long, very plain policy on equality that is on their website. It's on a public page of their website. You can go and see it. but it's really hard to consume, right? It's just black and white text, and you'll see in a moment, you just scroll through it again and again and again. They do have a little booklet version, but guess what? It's the same text, just tiny. So the first thing we did, we thought, okay, that's really hard for people to consume. So we changed it and created a infographic style booklet, because it's quite long. So it was more than just a page. So an infographic style booklet, in order to make it more visual and easier to consume. Remember I said earlier, infographics are a great way to take complex ideas and break them down and make them more visual. We didn't get rid of any of the information. We just made it much easier to consume. And in this training session, I knew that I was going to give them a tough scenario, like a really juicy human rights issue that they had to come together as a group and figure out. But they needed to have access to this policy. And given that the training originally was happening in person, and now it was happening online all these months later, I thought, are they going to have a copy of that policy handy? Probably not. And what's their digital literacy skills? Are they going to be able to be on Zoom in a breakout room having a discussion and also go on the website and find this digital version of this policy and then find something quickly in it? Probably not. So, okay, take it, make it more interesting into a booklet. But now, how do I get the booklet into their hands without having to print and mail the booklet? So I'm going to break them into breakout rooms. Keep that in mind. And I want them to have it in their hand. So next task then was to break them into breakout rooms. And just before we go any further, I want to remind you that in Zoom, you have options. You can put people into breakout rooms. You can assign them in advance, even if you have a registration list. But you can also, let people choose their breakout room. Depends on you just make that choice when you go to put people into breakout rooms. So for example, if you wanted to borrow from open space technology and you wanted to assign different topics to the different rooms, you could actually do that. You could give them names and then invite people to go ahead and choose whichever room they wanted to participate in. That was not the case with this training. I actually, in this case, let the computer just randomly assign them. It didn't matter who ended up with who. And if we were going to use breakout rooms today, I would do the math. I would look at how many people are here. I would say, I want groups of like 4 or 5 people. And then I would just, do some division and figure out how many rooms I wanted to use. And that's what you put in the top field there. Okay. Complicated policy. It's now existing in an infographic style workbook. And I want them to have it in their hands so that when they go to the breakout rooms, they can reference it. They can have it as a reference tool. So you can follow along if you want to. You can actually just scan this QR code and it will take you to a flip book version of that workbook. Carrie's going to share her screen and she's going to show you what the before and after looks like in this situation. If you want, this is a chance you can also adjust your screen size. So you can see on the left-hand side, that's the policy as it exists on their website, on the public page of their website. And it just goes on and on and on and on. Very long, very hard to consume. And on the right-hand side, it is now an infographic style workbook, which has also been changed into a flip book. So now when they're in their breakout groups, they actually have this in their hand. Remember, they took their phone, they scanned a QR code, and it opens up this flip book. You may have done it yourself. And now that is on their phone. So when they're having their discussion with their peers, trying to work their way through this scenario, they can actually have this booklet as a reference tool for using for their discussion. Thanks, Carrie. But even still, when you're delivering virtual instructor-led training, you got to think about the screen size that you're dealing with in that moment. So when we came back from the workout or from the breakout groups, I thought, well, the flip book is fine, but if we use the flip book, then it takes up the entire screen and it's a little bit clumsy. So instead, we went one step further and turned it into this very short one-pager job aid, which acted as the reference tool for the debrief. So you can see there were a lot of steps involved in making this exercise work really effectively. But that is the truth when it comes to designing effective online training. It takes time. Remember the chart I showed you? I said on the in the one corner was the virtual instructor-led training, which is just death by PowerPoint, cheap, easy, fast to produce, low learner retention rates. This kind of stuff takes more time and thought, and time generally results in labor costs, which increases the cost to produce and the length of time required, but your retention rates are higher, which I would venture to say is what we all want. We want. So if you're going to be designing online training, you need to tap into not just your instructional design skills and experiences that you may have, but now you also need to have sort of the creative eye of a graphic artist and the digital literacy skills of an IT professional. And those three things come together to create what we now call a learning experience designer. But the good news is e-learning provides this world of opportunity. I think we're already starting to see people say, oh, it's just so much easier online, or I can go to things that I couldn't participate in before because it was too costly for me to get there, or I couldn't fit it into my schedule. And I'm sure you've had this situation. You get to speak to persons around the world because of the digital technologies that we're all using. I can deliver training in Jamaica in the morning, and I can deliver training in Africa in the afternoon because I don't have to physically get there. And so it really opens up your opportunity to share your training with a broader audience, but it also allows for a broader audience to be able to benefit from the training that you're creating, because it's available anytime, anywhere, and everywhere, whether it's self-directed or live online training like today. You just have a much greater capacity to make it available to the world. So at this point, Carrie, I'm going to open it up to questions. If we have any in the chat, or if someone wants to raise their hand, you can ask your question yourself. I will say that if you haven't already done so, and I know if you were with me in Jamaica last week, you may have already downloaded this free ebook. It's called eLearning 101, and it's an introduction to all of the different terminology that's useful when you're in the e-learning space. So things like, what is an LMS, for example. You can download that, but just by scanning that QR code, and it'll take you directly there. And my contact information is listed as well, so reach out to me in any way, shape, or form. And if you have any questions afterwards that you think of, don't hesitate to send me an email at janet@welovelearning.ca. If you were with me last week in Jamaica and you've already downloaded this booklet, send me an email, put workbook in the subject line, and I will give you access to another one that is hidden on our site that you can't just find. So Carrie, do we have any questions that are lingering?
We don't have any just yet, but I've just let everyone know to go ahead and raise.
Siri thought I said was talking to her. Sorry about that.
I'll jump in here, Janet. This is Rob. First of all, this is fantastic. It's amazing how many tools you've employed in less than an hour and engaged the entire time. With all the temptation to again go on another screen. I didn't once, and again, that's a testament.
I love that. That is awesome, because that's what I'm going for. I want you to be so busy that you can't get bored or distracted. So I love that you said that. Thank you. Made my day.
So the one point I wanted to ask you is that, again, you're a seasoned professional. That this is what you do for a living. So obviously, your presentation, for lack of better terms, is slick and efficient and extremely professional. For the rest of us, how long does it take, or how much practice would you say before you go into a presentation do you actually do it? So for example, I look at everything that you've just taught me today. I wouldn't just go and do it tomorrow. So can you give me some sort of idea how much practice it would take to do, I don't know, even half what you did in an hour before, let's say, I go in front of, my leadership group or a board, for example?
Yeah. So the industry standard for what we did today is 71 to 1. Remember I said e-learning is time consuming to produce. In fact, if we go back to the in-person days, Carrie and I used to treasure that we could always come in right around the industry standard, which was 23 to 1. In other words, 23 hours of prep and work goes into every finished hour of in-person classroom training. In the online world, that number is bigger, partly because the programming, and the technology side comes into play more. And because you can't just take an in-person training session and plunk it online. We've seen lots of people do that this past while, and it's not very effective. They just take an in-person training and think, okay, well, I'll set a camera up in the training room and I'll talk at people. But you have to think about it differently. You have to think about it, like I always think, like we're trying to solve puzzles, whether the learner's going to be there like today or they're not going to be there, like the self-directed world. We're always solving puzzles. Like, how can we make this interactive? How can we make the learner feel like they're engaged in it, or like we're reaching through the screen, or that they're part of it, they're consumed by it, they're not sitting back here like just watching it or seeing it. So what we did today, which was on that very busy chart, that was the complex version of live online. The industry standard is 71:1, meaning 71 hours would go into creating a 1-hour workshop like we did today. Mic drop. Big
Rob's
silence.
on mute.
Yeah, you might be able to get it done in a bit less, certainly.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sorry. I got
Sorry,
that.
go
Thank
ahead.
you. That was great. Thank you, Janet.
Okay.
I do have another question, Janet, from the chat. Carrie Ann is wondering if the chart with the VILT and complexity and retention rates could be made available.
It will be in the recording, so you can always maybe do a screenshot from it.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions that you have? The recording will actually be posted on our YouTube channel probably in a few days. We just, this is another thing, I guess, what would you call it, a pet peeve of mine, is that lots of events are recorded. And then, as you know, in Zoom, the recording is potentially available within half an hour. And then people send it out with no editing. And so if you've logged in early and you have that, awkward silence going on in the chitter chatter, I say take an extra day and have somebody edit that stuff out, so that when the learner goes to, maybe somebody missed the session and they're going to watch it on replay, they don't have to suffer through all of that. And I say suffer because I mean that word. And the other thing to edit out is while people are in breakout rooms, usually the instructor, or maybe if you have co-facilitators, are like backstage, if you will, just chit-chatting with each other or planning their next move and reviewing what they're going to do when people come back out of the breakout rooms. People watching the recording, they don't need to see that edited out. So send people to breakout rooms and then poof, magically they come back.
What is going on with this thing? Oh, cute.
Did you have a question, Stephen? Oh, maybe not.
Oh, apologies. I didn't realize I was unmuted.
No problem. Nice to see you again. So I see there's a question from Sharon.
Yep.
Have you done this one, Carrie? Is there any type of learning that just doesn't work online? Thoughts on demonstration skills? Okay. So one of the guidelines that I use when we're scoping out a project with a new client, let's say, is if you can evaluate it online, then you can reasonably teach it online. So I'll give you an example. I could teach you I could test, let's say we were learning to bake a chocolate cheesecake. I could test you at the end of that training session, and I could tell if you know the ingredients that you need to purchase to bake a chocolate cheesecake. I could test you on the steps that need to go into it. I could ask you all kinds of knowledge-based questions. At the end of the day, though, I can't taste your cake. I don't know if you actually made a nice chocolate cheesecake that is creamy and delicious, or maybe it was chunky and not very good, right? So I can't do that final test. And that's when we get into hybrid approaches. So I know with the pandemic, that is a little bit difficult right now, although we worked with someone recently. They trained people on the effective use of guns for security officers, because there were so many security officers required as part of the pandemic. So a certain amount of the training can be done online, but at some point the person has to come into a in-person environment, and the instructor has to be able to assess whether or not that person can safely operate a gun or reasonably bake a delicious cake. So sometimes a hybrid is needed in order to get that last little bit of the evaluation process. But does that give you a bit of an idea, Sharon? Yeah, perfect. Okay. Any other questions, Carrie?
Nothing so far, so I guess it's really wide open. If anybody wants to just pose a question, you can take your microphone off mute and feel free.
Yeah. Okay, well, I want to respect people's time. I'm grateful that you joined me for an hour, that you took an hour out of your life to spend with me. And I hope most importantly that you learn some things that you'll be able to take away and apply in the work that you do, and that you'll be able to use these to improve the quality of the VILT training sessions that you create and deliver to others. So thank you very much for joining me. As I said, this will be available in a couple of days. We'll post it on the YouTube channel, and I'll make sure I send an email to everybody with the link so that you know that it's there. Thanks so much, everyone.